I didn't come to ask for money, the little black girl said quietly, holding out a weathered envelope with both hands. I came to return my father's debt. The words drifted through the polished marble lobby with a calmness that somehow silenced every conversation around her. Executives in tailored suits slowed their hurried steps. A receptionist blinked in confusion. Even the steady hum of the glass elevators seemed to fade beneath the impossible weight of a child's voice. Ava Brooks was only 8 years old, small enough that the reception desk reached nearly to her shoulders. Yet she stood with a quiet confidence that didn't belong to someone wearing faded sneakers, neatly patched jeans, and a pale blue sweater that had clearly been washed too many times. Her tightly braided hair framed a face that carried neither fear nor shame. She wasn't there to beg. She wasn't there to complain. She wasn't even there to explain. She simply waited, clutching an old manila envelope whose corners had softened from years of careful handling. Inside the top-floor boardroom, William Carter was finishing another meeting that had lasted longer than expected. At 52, he had built Carter Industries into one of the largest engineering companies in America. Newspapers admired his discipline. Investors admired his instincts. Employees respected the impossible standards he expected from everyone, including himself. His days were measured in quarterly reports, acquisition meetings, and decisions worth millions of dollars. He rarely noticed what happened downstairs in the lobby. But today, something interrupted the carefully ordered rhythm of his morning. His executive assistant entered quietly and leaned toward him. "Sir, there's a little girl downstairs asking to see you." William barely looked up from the contract in front of him. "Does she have an appointment?" "No, sir." "Then have security help her find whoever she's looking for." The assistant hesitated. "She says she's here because of a debt." "Your debt." William's pen stopped moving. For the first time that morning, silence filled the room. A debt? The word felt strangely unfamiliar. William owed banks. Investors owed him. Companies negotiated obligations every day. But a child? He closed the folder slowly. What exactly did she say? Only one sentence. The assistant swallowed gently. "I came to return my father's debt." Minutes later, the polished elevator doors opened onto the lobby. William walked across the marble floor with measured steps, expecting confusion, perhaps even a misunderstanding. Instead, he found the little girl standing exactly where she'd been all along. She looked up when she heard his footsteps. Their eyes met for the first time. Without smiling, without hesitation, Ava carefully lifted the envelope toward him as though it were something far more valuable than money. "Mr. Carter?" she asked softly. He nodded. "My daddy told me this belongs to you." William accepted the envelope almost automatically. The paper felt surprisingly heavy in his hands despite weighing almost nothing. Across the front, written in faded blue ink he hadn't seen in decades, was his own name. Beneath it, in handwriting that stirred a memory he couldn't quite reach, were 4 simple words. For William Carter only. His heartbeat slowed. Something deep inside him, something buried beneath 20 years of success, quietly began to wake. William stared at the faded handwriting without opening the envelope. The letters looked strangely familiar, not because he recognized every curve immediately, but because they carried the weight of another lifetime, one that had slowly disappeared beneath board meetings, newspaper headlines, and years of impossible deadlines. Around them, the lobby remained unusually quiet. Employees who normally hurried toward elevators now found reasons to linger. Nobody spoke above a whisper. Ava simply stood with her hands folded in front of her, watching the billionaire with patient eyes. She did not appear nervous. She looked as though she had already completed the hardest part of her journey by walking through those revolving glass doors. William finally broke the silence. "Where did you get this?" His voice was calm, but no longer carried the effortless confidence everyone around him knew so well. "My father kept it in a little wooden box," Ava answered. "He said it belonged to you until the day I could bring it back myself." William lowered his eyes to the envelope again. "Your father, what is his name?" "Daniel Brooks." The name landed gently, yet it echoed through his memory like a distant church bell. Daniel Brooks. William repeated it silently, searching through years that suddenly felt much closer than they had only minutes earlier. He could not picture the man's face. Not yet, but the name refused to leave him. He looked at Ava again. "How old are you?" 8. "And you came here alone?" She nodded. "My neighbor drove me to the bus station before work." Then I took one bus and another. The lady at the second station told me which building was yours. Several people nearby exchanged surprised glances. William looked toward the entrance, where busy downtown traffic continued beyond the glass walls. That is a long trip for someone your age. Ava gave a small shrug. Daddy always said promises are worth traveling for. The words settled somewhere deep inside William's chest. They were simple, honest, completely free of expectation. She had not asked him for anything. She had not mentioned hardship, even though her worn backpack and carefully repaired clothes quietly spoke for themselves. She was only finishing something her father had started. William turned the envelope over. The seal had never been broken. A thin layer of age had turned the paper slightly golden. One corner carried the faint outline of water stains, as though someone had once protected it during a heavy rain. Every mark suggested years of careful preservation. Nothing about it felt accidental. Did your father ever tell you what was inside? William asked. Ava shook her head. He said it was not mine to read. Even after William stopped himself before finishing the sentence. Ava understood anyway. No, sir. He said some things only matter when they reach the right person. William inhaled slowly. Those words sounded nothing like modern life. They belonged to another generation, another kind of man. His assistant stepped beside him quietly. Sir, your next meeting starts in 10 minutes. William did not answer. Immediately, his eyes remained fixed on the weathered envelope resting in his hands. For the first time in years, 10 minutes no longer seemed important. He looked back at Ava, noticing how tired her little sneakers appeared after such a long journey. Have you eaten breakfast? She smiled politely. Yes, sir. Peanut butter sandwich. My neighbor made two. I saved one in case the buses were late. William felt something inside him shift again. There was dignity in every answer she gave, a quiet strength that money could never purchase. He looked toward the elevators, then back at the child standing before him. Would you come upstairs with me? Ava nodded without hesitation. Yes, sir. As the elevator doors closed behind them, William glanced down once more at the familiar handwriting on the envelope. Somewhere behind those faded blue letters was a chapter of his life he had forgotten. And for reasons he could not explain, he was suddenly afraid of how much it would remember about him. The private elevator rose in complete silence, its glass walls revealing the skyline stretching across the city. Ava stood quietly beside William, her small backpack resting against her knees while she looked out at the buildings with calm curiosity instead of excitement. She had never been inside a skyscraper before, yet she treated the moment with the same quiet respect she had shown since walking into the lobby. When the elevator reached the executive floor, William led her through a hallway lined with photographs marking the company's history. Awards, groundbreaking ceremonies, and smiling faces filled the walls, each celebrating another milestone in Carter Industries. Ava slowed for only one photograph before stopping completely. It showed a much younger William standing beside several construction workers at the opening of a bridge nearly 20 years earlier. She studied the picture carefully. He used to talk about this bridge, she whispered. William turned sharply. Your father mentioned this project? Ava nodded. He always said it was the proudest job he ever had. William looked back at the framed photograph. He recognized every executive standing beside him, but the workers in hard hats had long blended into forgotten memories. He searched each face until one man near the edge of the picture seemed strangely familiar. Before he could be certain, they reached his office. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the room with bright afternoon light, overlooking miles of highways, neighborhoods, and rivers that connected the city below. William invited Ava to sit at a round table instead of the large conference desk. His assistant quietly placed 2 glasses of water nearby before closing the door, leaving them alone. William rested the unopened envelope between them. I think it is time to understand why your father protected this for so many years. Ava folded her hands in her lap. Daddy always said I should never hurry important things. William offered a faint smile. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Ava answered softly. He fixed almost everything. Bicycles, lamps, old fences. Sometimes neighbors paid him. Sometimes they just thanked him. He always smiled either way. William listened without interrupting. The little girl's words painted a picture more clearly than any photograph could. Daniel Brooks had lived a simple life, yet every sentence carried quiet dignity instead of sadness. Did he ever talk about me? William finally asked. Ava nodded again. Not very much. He said you were busy building things that helped lots of people. He never spoke badly about you. William looked down, surprised by the answer. Even after all these years. He said holding anger is like carrying rocks in your backpack. It only makes the walk harder. The room became still again. William could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to him with such uncomplicated honesty. He slowly loosened the string wrapped around the old envelope. The paper crackled gently, as though protesting the passage of time. Inside rested a single folded sheet, yellowed with age, and something else slipped onto the polished wooden table. It was a brass key no larger than a child's thumb, attached to a worn leather tag. Stamped into the faded leather were 4 numbers. 2147. William stared at the tiny key, confusion replacing curiosity. What is this? Ava leaned forward and shook her head. I do not know. Daddy only said that when you saw it, you would remember where the real answer was waiting. William picked up the key carefully. The smooth edges told him it had been handled many times over many years. His pulse quickened. Somewhere in the deepest corner of his memory, those 4 numbers stirred a feeling he could almost reach but not yet grasp. Then his eyes fell to the folded letter beneath the key. Across the front, written in the same faded blue ink, were 6 simple words that made his breathing slow almost to a stop. Please forgive yourself before reading this. William held the folded letter for several long seconds without opening it. The sentence written across the front seemed less like an instruction and more like a kindness offered by someone who understood the burden another person had carried for years. He slowly lowered the paper back onto the table and looked at the small brass key resting beside it. The numbers stamped into the worn leather tag refused to leave his thoughts. 2, 1, 4, 7. Somewhere, hidden beneath decades of meetings, achievements, and carefully organized memories, those numbers belonged to a place he had once known. Ava watched him quietly, never urging him to hurry. She took a careful sip of water before speaking. Daddy always smiled when he looked at that key. William lifted his eyes. Did he ever tell you why? She shook her head. Only that one day you would know. The room settled into another thoughtful silence. Sunlight reflected across the polished floor, while distant traffic drifted faintly through the insulated windows. For the first time in many years, William ignored the notifications flashing across the tablet on his desk. Contracts could wait. Investors could wait. Whatever rested inside this old envelope had already waited far longer than either of them. He finally unfolded the letter with careful hands. The paper had become delicate with age, but the handwriting remained steady and unmistakably confident. Dear William, if you are reading this, then my little girl kept the promise I asked her to keep. That means she found you, and it means life gave both of us another chance, even if we never expected it. William stopped reading. His throat tightened unexpectedly. He glanced toward Ava. She sat patiently, her feet barely touching the floor, looking not at the letter but at the city beyond the windows. She had respected her father's wish all these years. She still did. William continued. You probably think this envelope is about money because that is how people usually understand the word debt. But this was never about dollars. It was never about repayment. It was about remembering. William's breathing slowed. His eyes moved carefully across each line. 20 years ago, you gave me something no paycheck could ever buy. You believed me when almost nobody else did. You trusted me with work when my family needed hope more than anything. I promised myself I would spend the rest of my life proving that your trust had value. If I succeeded, then someday I wanted to return that promise to you, not because you demanded it, but because gratitude deserves to come home. William lowered the letter halfway. His memories remained incomplete, but they were beginning to move. He remembered a rainy morning at a construction site. He remembered shaking a worker's hand. He remembered saying, I think you deserve a chance. Everything after that remained hidden behind a fog he could not yet clear. Ava noticed the change in his expression. Are you remembering him? She asked gently. William answered honestly. Pieces. Only pieces. She smiled with quiet encouragement. Daddy said memories are like sunrise. They do not appear all at once. William looked back at the page. Near the bottom, one sentence had been underlined. When you are ready, take the key to locker 2147 at Grand Central Union Station. Everything you forgot is still waiting there. William stared at the words until they blurred. Grand Central Union Station. Suddenly, the numbers no longer felt mysterious. He remembered renting storage lockers years ago during long construction projects, places where workers kept blueprints, personal belongings, and documents safe from weather. His heartbeat quickened. Whatever Daniel had left behind had survived too, decades untouched. William carefully folded the letter again and slipped it back into the envelope with far greater respect than when he had first received it. Then he looked at Ava, whose quiet courage had already changed the course of his entire day. "Would you come with me to the station?" he asked softly. Ava nodded without hesitation. Daddy said the last part of the promise was supposed to happen together. 30 minutes later, the black sedan rolled away from Carter Industries and merged into the steady afternoon traffic. William sat beside Ava instead of behind the privacy divider that usually separated him from everyone else. His phone vibrated every few seconds with incoming calls, meeting reminders, and messages marked urgent. For the first time in years, he silenced every notification and slipped the phone into his coat pocket. The city stretched around them beneath a pale autumn sky, its sidewalks filled with people carrying coffee cups, briefcases, and grocery bags, each absorbed in the ordinary rhythm of another weekday. Ava rested her backpack on her lap and watched the passing neighborhoods through the window. She smiled when they crossed a bridge overlooking the river. "Daddy used to bring me here on Saturdays," she said softly. "We would count the boats until the sun started going down." William followed her gaze toward the water sparkling beneath the afternoon light. Did he like the river? Ava nodded. He said rivers never stop moving forward, even when they have to bend. William found himself writing those words into his memory. Daniel Brooks seemed to have left wisdom everywhere, tucked inside ordinary conversations that became unforgettable long after they were spoken. As they approached Grand Central Union Station, the familiar stone building rose above the busy streets exactly as William remembered it. The grand clock tower, the polished entrance, and the endless flow of travelers carried him backward through time. He had not stepped inside the station in nearly 2 decades. Too many years had passed. Too many chapters had closed. Yet somehow the place looked almost unchanged. The driver opened the door, but William waited for Ava to step out first. Together they entered the station, where sunlight poured through the tall windows and settled across the marble floor in wide golden rectangles. Families hurried toward departing trains. Business travelers pulled rolling suitcases behind them. Somewhere a young violinist played a gentle melody that floated through the enormous hall. Ava looked around with quiet wonder. "It is beautiful," she whispered. William smiled faintly. "I used to think so too." They walked toward the row of storage lockers hidden along a quieter corridor near the old baggage area. Most travelers passed without noticing them. The lockers had been modernized over the years, but one section of older metal doors remained untouched. William counted slowly as they moved down the row. 2143, 2144, 2145, 2146. Then they stopped. Locker 2147 stood exactly where the letter had promised. The dull gray paint had faded with age, and tiny scratches covered the metal surface, but the keyhole remained unchanged. William looked down at the small brass key resting in his palm. It fit his fingers as naturally as though he had carried it yesterday, instead of receiving it only hours earlier. Ava stepped back respectfully. "Daddy said only you should open it." William took a slow breath and carefully inserted the key. For one brief moment, it refused to turn. Then, with a soft metallic click, the lock released. The sound echoed far louder in William's heart than in the quiet hallway. He gently opened the narrow door. Inside was not money, nor jewelry, nor legal documents. Resting neatly on the shelf was a weathered cedar box, carefully wrapped in a faded blue cloth that had been tied with ordinary cotton string. A handwritten tag lay on top. The paper had yellowed with age, but the message remained perfectly clear. "Open this only when you are ready to remember the man you used to be." William stood motionless, his fingertips trembling slightly as they hovered above the box. He had come expecting answers. Instead, Daniel Brooks had left him another invitation, one that reached far deeper than memory. Beside him, Ava looked at the cedar box with peaceful certainty, as though she had known all along that her father had never hidden a treasure. He had simply protected a truth until the right heart was ready to receive it. William lifted the cedar box with both hands as though it contained something fragile enough to disappear if handled carelessly. The wood was smooth from years of careful polishing, and the faint scent of cedar still lingered despite the decades it had spent inside the locker. Ava stood quietly beside him, her eyes filled not with curiosity, but with respect. She never reached toward the box. She simply waited, honoring the promise her father had protected for so many years. William untied the faded cotton string and folded back the blue cloth. The brass hinges gave a gentle creak as the lid slowly opened. Inside, everything had been arranged with remarkable care. On top rested a worn leather notebook, its corners softened by time. Beneath it lay several neatly stacked photographs, a small carpenter's pencil no longer than William's hand, and an old company identification badge bearing Daniel Brooks's smiling face. William picked up the badge first. The younger Daniel looked exactly as he had in the faded bridge photograph, his eyes bright with quiet confidence. William stared at the picture for several seconds before something inside him finally shifted. He remembered that smile. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to recognize it. He carefully set the badge aside and opened the notebook. The first page contained only a single sentence written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Every building begins with a foundation nobody sees. William slowly turned the page. The notebook was not a diary. It was a collection of observations, ideas, and lessons gathered over many years. Some pages described construction projects. Others contained sketches of bridges, beams, and work crews. But what caught William's attention were the names written beside each project. Daniel had carefully listed the people who had helped, encouraged, or taught him, never taking full credit for anything. William found his own name near the beginning of the notebook. Beside it, Daniel had written, "Mr. Carter trusted a quiet worker before anyone else did. I hope I spend my life proving he was right." William lowered his head, feeling warmth gather behind his eyes. He continued reading. Every few pages, another short reflection appeared. Wealth can build tall buildings, but kindness builds the people inside them. Never measure success by what stays in your pocket. Measure it by what stays in another person's heart. If someone gives you dignity, never repay it with pride. William closed the notebook for a moment. None of the pages spoke about hardship. None complained about unfairness. Daniel had filled hundreds of lines with gratitude instead of resentment. Ava noticed William's expression soften. "He wrote almost every Sunday evening," she said quietly. "After dinner, he would sit by the window with that notebook until the stars came out." William smiled faintly. "Did you ever ask what he was writing?" "Once." She looked down at her folded hands. "He said he was practicing remembering the good things before they became too old." William reopened the notebook and discovered a folded photograph tucked between the final pages. He carefully removed it. The picture showed a much younger William standing beside Daniel in front of the nearly completed bridge. They were both smiling, their work boots covered with dust, each holding one end of a wooden sign that read, "Final safety inspection completed." William's breath caught. Suddenly, another memory returned with startling clarity. He remembered insisting that every worker stand together for the photograph because Daniel had noticed a structural detail that prevented months of expensive repairs. William had publicly thanked him that afternoon. He remembered the applause. He remembered Daniel trying to step out of the picture because he believed someone else deserved the attention. William had forgotten that entire day. Daniel never had. Tucked behind the photograph was one final envelope, smaller than the first and sealed with dark blue wax. Across the front, Daniel had written only 7 words. "Read this after your memory comes home." William gently held the unopened envelope while looking toward Ava. For the first time that afternoon, he understood that Daniel had not spent 20 years preserving old papers. He had spent 20 years preserving another man's forgotten character, believing that one day it could still be found. William looked at the dark blue wax seal for a long moment before carefully breaking it. The paper inside was folded only once, as though Daniel had expected it to be opened gently rather than hurriedly. Ava remained beside him, her small hands resting quietly against the cedar box while travelers continued walking through the station beyond the quiet corridor. The world outside moved exactly as it always had, yet for William, time seemed to stand completely still. He unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear William, if you have reached this page, then you finally remembered that day at the bridge. I hoped you would. Not because I needed you to remember me, but because I wanted you to remember yourself." William swallowed slowly and continued. The man I met all those years ago was not famous. He was not surrounded by cameras or interviews. He walked through every work site shaking hands, learning names, and asking questions that made ordinary people feel important. You once told me that a company could only stand as tall as the people holding it up. I wrote those words down because I never wanted to forget them. I hope you did not either. William closed his eyes for a brief moment. The sentence struck him harder than anything he had read so far. He remembered saying those exact words during a lunch break beneath the unfinished bridge. He had believed them with all his heart. Somewhere along the years, success had buried them beneath schedules, profits, and responsibilities until they had become almost impossible to hear. He opened his eyes and continued reading. Life changed for both of us after that project. Mine became smaller. Yours became much bigger. That is the way life works sometimes. But I never considered myself unlucky because every time I looked at my little girl, I remembered that dignity is worth more than comfort. If she is standing beside you now, then I already know she made you smile before asking you for anything. That was always her gift. William lowered the letter and looked at Ava. She smiled shyly. Daddy said people smile differently when they remember something good. William could not help smiling back. He was right. Ava reached into her backpack and carefully removed something wrapped inside a clean white handkerchief. There is one more thing, she said softly. Daddy told me not to show you until after you read that letter. She unfolded the cloth and revealed a small silver pocket watch. The metal was worn smooth, but it still reflected the afternoon light. William stared at it in disbelief. I have not seen this in 20 years. Ava tilted her head. It is yours. William nodded slowly. I thought I had lost it. Ava carefully placed the watch into his hand. Daddy found it after everyone went home from the bridge. He wanted to return it the next morning, but you were already traveling to another project. Then he said life became busy for both of you. William pressed the tiny latch. The watch opened with a soft click. Inside the cover was an engraved message he had almost forgotten. Build people first. Buildings will follow. William felt tears gather despite every effort to hold them back. He remembered having those words engraved when Carter Industries was still a small family company. They had once been his purpose. Somewhere over the years, they had become only a forgotten sentence hidden inside a watch he believed was gone forever. Ava looked up at him with gentle concern. Daddy always said that if you ever held that watch again, you would know the debt was never yours to pay. It was yours to keep alive. William closed the watch carefully and wrapped his fingers around it. In that quiet hallway, surrounded by memories that had waited faithfully for 2 decades, he realized Daniel Brooks had never protected an old envelope or a forgotten key. He had protected the values that had once made an ordinary businessman worthy of another man's lifelong gratitude, trusting that one little girl would someday carry them safely home. William and Ava left the quiet corridor carrying the cedar box together, neither of them speaking for several moments. The sounds of the station gradually returned around them, footsteps crossing polished floors, distant train announcements, and families greeting loved ones after long journeys. Yet everything seemed different to William now. The city had not changed, but the way he looked at it had. As they stepped outside, a cool breeze carried the scent of autumn leaves through the streets. William opened the rear door of the waiting sedan, but before Ava climbed inside, she stopped and looked toward the busy sidewalk. An elderly man wearing a maintenance uniform was struggling to gather several rolled blueprints that had slipped from his hands. Without saying a word, Ava hurried over and knelt beside him, carefully collecting every sheet before the wind could carry them away. Thank you, sweetheart, the man said warmly. These old hands are not as quick as they used to be. Ava smiled as she returned the last roll. Daddy said helping should always be faster than watching. William stood quietly beside the car, listening to the familiar sentence. Daniel's kindness had not ended with his own life. It had continued naturally through his daughter, not as a lesson she recited, but as a habit she lived. When Ava returned, William asked softly, "Has anyone ever told you that you remind them of your father?" She nodded. Grandma used to say that every time I shared something without being asked. William smiled gently. She was right. During the drive back downtown, William looked through the notebook once more. Between 2 pages, he noticed a folded receipt that had escaped his attention before. It was from a neighborhood diner dated almost 19 years earlier. Across the back, Daniel had written another short note. If success ever makes you forget people's names, start over before it is too late. William folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. He knew exactly where it belonged now. As the car stopped in front of Carter Industries, dozens of employees were leaving for the evening. Several recognized the black sedan and paused respectfully as William stepped onto the sidewalk. Then they noticed Ava beside him, still carrying her old backpack. Instead of walking directly inside, William remained near the entrance and watched people greet one another after work. Some exchanged smiles. Others hurried toward buses or trains, eager to return home to their families. For years he had walked through this same entrance thinking only about the next meeting. Today he noticed every face. His assistant approached with a tablet in her hands. "Sir, tomorrow's schedule is completely full. We also have 3 investor calls waiting for confirmation." William looked at the crowded calendar displayed on the screen before quietly handing it back. "Clear the entire morning." She blinked in surprise. "All of it? Every meeting? May I ask why?" William looked across the lobby where several maintenance workers were finishing their day. "Because there are people in this building whose names I should have learned a long time ago." The assistant smiled, though she did not fully understand. Ava did. She looked up at William with quiet pride, the same expression Daniel might have worn years earlier. As they entered the lobby together, William paused beside the company mission engraved into the marble wall. He had passed those words thousands of times without truly seeing them. Tonight, he stood reading every line slowly. Then he reached into his pocket, removed the silver watch, and gently opened its cover once more. "Build people first. Buildings will follow." He closed it again with a peaceful smile and realized that the greatest gift Daniel Brooks had preserved was not hidden inside a locker, a notebook, or an old envelope. It was the chance for one man to become the person he had once promised himself he would never stop being. The following Monday morning, every employee at Carter Industries received an unexpected invitation to gather in the main atrium before work began. There were no investors, no reporters, no cameras. Only the people who arrived every day to keep the company moving forward. Engineers stood beside receptionists. Custodians stood beside executives. Maintenance workers stood beside department directors. They looked at one another with quiet curiosity as William Carter stepped onto the small platform without a prepared speech in his hands. Beside him stood Ava Brooks, wearing the same neatly mended blue sweater and holding the cedar box that had changed both of their lives. William looked across the crowd for a long moment before speaking. 20 years ago, he began quietly, I believed I was building bridges. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that the greatest things we build are people. The room fell completely silent. William lifted Daniel's worn company identification badge so everyone could see it. Most of you have never heard this man's name. His name was Daniel Brooks. He worked here with honesty, humility, and gratitude. He never asked for recognition. He never demanded repayment. Instead, he spent the rest of his life remembering one act of trust that I had completely forgotten. William paused as emotion gently caught his voice. He looked toward Ava, who gave him the same calm smile her father had once given him years before. Last week, he continued, his daughter came here carrying what she called a debt. I believed she had come to ask for something. Instead, she returned something I had lost long ago. He opened the silver pocket watch and held it beside Daniel's notebook. This company was founded on a simple belief. Build people first. Buildings will follow. I engraved those words into this watch many years ago. Then I stopped living by them. Daniel never did. Across the atrium, several longtime employees lowered their eyes thoughtfully. Others smiled quietly as though remembering people who had once believed in them when they needed it most. William continued, beginning today, Carter Industries will establish the Daniel Brooks Foundation. Every year it will provide scholarships, apprenticeships, and career opportunities for young people whose character is greater than their circumstances. Not because they need charity, but because they deserve someone willing to believe in them. Gentle applause spread through the room, growing stronger with every passing second. William waited until the sound settled before turning toward Ava. He knelt so they were eye to eye. There is something I owe you, he said softly. Ava shook her head with the same quiet confidence she had carried from the beginning. No, sir. Daddy said the promise ended when you remembered. William smiled through grateful tears. Your father was right again. He carefully placed Daniel's notebook, the photographs, the pocket watch, and the old envelope back inside the cedar box before handing it to Ava. These belong to your family. Ava accepted the box gently. Will you keep one thing? She asked. She reached inside and removed the small carpenter's pencil before placing it into William's hand. Daddy said builders should always have something to remind them where every great project begins. William closed his fingers around the little pencil as though it were priceless. Sunlight poured through the glass walls behind them, filling the atrium with warm morning light. Employees slowly returned to their work, but the atmosphere had quietly changed. People greeted one another by name. Managers paused to thank co-workers whose efforts often went unnoticed. Before leaving, Ava looked once more at the engraved company mission on the marble wall. This time William stood beside her instead of walking past it. Together they read every word in silence. Then Ava smiled and whispered, I think Daddy would like this place now. William looked around at the people filling the building with purpose rather than titles, and with peaceful gratitude he answered, I believe he always did. He was simply waiting for me to see it again.